So I mentioned a little bit before about who NEON is. We're a little bit different from others on the panel in terms of we are delivering data to the community. So a lot of our decision making was on the front end. But we're entirely funded by the National Science Foundation to provide this data as a community resource. And so we want to be sure that it is a resource for the community, and that's something that we continue to work on. But all the data are free and open. Something that makes NEON a little bit different than some of the other projects that were somewhat similar. I don't know if folks are familiar with the Long-Term Ecological Research Network, but they had a similar distribution of sites all around the country. But they each, whoever the PI was at those locations, they determined how data were going to be collected. So you couldn't compare data across scales. And so a big part of NEON is collecting the same data and making it interoperable across all of these different sites. So we have 81 different field sites, both terrestrial and aquatic, and we're collecting a little over 180 environmental data products at each one of those. The protocols, the data that are being collected, all of that was determined by a large number of what were called tiger teams. These were initiated by the National Science Foundation and basically had different researchers come together and have discussions about what protocols were going to be utilized, what data would be collected. I think I've spoke about this before. Those discussions happened over probably the course of a decade. It was a long time of discussions, and I don't think the history has been fully captured. So from some conversations that I've had, though, I'm not sure this process was the most equitable, I should say. I think it was really driven by lead researchers in some of these different areas. You know, all the data again that are being collected were determined were determined by these teams. And then there's a lot of documentation around the different protocols and the different data products. So we collect data from automated instruments. We have folks on the ground collecting field data, and then we also collect airborne remote sensing data. The remote sensing data is one of our biggest challenges because the files are so large. It's really hard to share those in a cloud, in the cloud for others to obtain them. And so that's something we continue to work on. The way the data are processed once they're delivered either into a data entry app or you know, through these automated sensors, go into this pipeline, which again, the pipeline that's been defined, there's a lot of documentation around that and was also supported by, you know, community members and how that should be done. But we have it for all the different types of data that we're collecting. So again, for the remote sensing data, you'll see for the remote sensing data specifically that I mentioned, the data is captured in this computer like on the aircraft, and then it's actually transferred still to hard drives before they're delivered to NEON headquarters. So they're still having to deliver it in that way. Considering the size, it's still quicker than doing it over the internet. So it's kind of interesting. But we have a data portal where, you know, you can go to get any of the data that's been collected. You can download the data directly from that portal. We also have an API that allows you to get the data in that way as well. And again, all the protocols and everything about the data products, the documentation can all be found there. But it is quite challenging to navigate through because they're big documents. So it's a lot of information. But we do work with data repositories to make our data available on other sites. So we've even been talking to Pajau and their team at MNDC about providing our microbiome data through their portal as well. But we try to offer the data to all of these different repositories when we can. We continue to work with what we call technical working groups. So these are external advisory groups. We have 25 currently. So the community still continues to advise us on the types of data that are being collected, the protocols that are being used, just because science is constantly changing. The best protocols and the best products or deliverables are constantly changing. So we have to react to that. So we basically have a process where these technical working groups will advise some of our science staff. They'll take this recommendation to our operations, internal operations leadership team, who can make certain decisions depending on any sort of budget limitations associated with those adjustments, and depending on the size of budget needs associated with changes in the protocol. We sometimes have to reach out to NSF, who's our funding organization, to get their approval, again, depending on the size of the need. But this was just a image of a specific example where we changed some of the tick-borne pathogen data that we were collecting, where we were initially focusing on hantaviruses, and now we're focusing more on tick-borne illnesses like Lyme disease and Rocky Mountain spotted fever and that kind of thing. So when we do try to change the protocols, we have a pilot year, and then if all goes well, that can be moved into how we're start collecting the data moving forward. So that's just a brief overview. I'll stop sharing there.